Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Fenshaw and I'm the Network Manager for Connected Everything. Thank you very much for joining this session today. I think we've got a few people who are just waiting to join, so we'll just give them a minute to join us. But this is the session for creativity and design. So if you're expecting to be talking about that, you're in the right place. We do have another parallel session. So if you're expecting something else, then there is another link to go to. But hopefully you're here to help us think about creativity and design. Great. Hi there, Jeremy. Hope you're doing well. Hi, Ben. Good to see you. Hi, Susan. Great to see all the hellos coming in. I'm not going to do a complete roll call. So that's brilliant. It looks like it looks like we've got good attendance today. So brilliant to see you all. This is going to be an interactive session. We are going to ask you to discuss things on your virtual tables. So hopefully you've already had a experience of doing that while we're waiting for this session to join. And also, I will be explaining a little bit about how that session works and the questions we'll be asking you to look at once we've seen our first presentation, which is about creativity and design, kindly put together by Craig Whittet from the Glasgow School of Arts. So we'll hand over to that presentation now.
Hello, welcome to my presentation for Connected Everything. My name is Craig Whittet. I'm Head of Department of Product Engineering, collaborative programme run between the Glasgow School of Art and the University of Glasgow. I've been asked to look at creativity and design, and initially I'm going to start by looking at STEM and the creativity elements of that. A number of us may recognise an image of this nature, where we've had some involvement with a STEM project, whether it's at secondary, primary, even in some cases nursery. And we're using STEM as a means of hopefully inspiring the younger learners to think about a career in STEM-related subjects. In a lot of cases, we're using technology. We're looking at how the younger learners actually combine and connect, etc., in order to carry out a certain task or function. These are fantastic opportunities and are very rewarding for those of us that are involved in them. However, I'm beginning to question how we're approaching these. I'm not saying that the work that's been carried out by organisations involved in STEM has to be reconsidered, but what I'm thinking is, do we need to shift focus? Do we need to start looking at the younger user? If we consider the capacity of the human brain for a moment, I'm sure we'd all agree that it's an incredibly complex organ, and we're still learning a considerable amount about capacity and the capability of the brain. If you look at some of these figures, they're truly, literally mind-boggling. However, if we look at points 3 and 4, these are areas that I think we could really begin to capitalise on. So a child up to the age of 3 has approximately 1,000 trillion connections or synapses, and this number reduces steadily until stability is reached around the age of 20. Now that age of 20 is an age that a number of us will recognise from higher education as a key point in our students' development and learning, whether coming to their senior years or in some cases it may be just starting because they've taken a few gap years. Looking at children at that age of 3 or thereabouts, they have a high level of theta waves when they are awake, and these are heavily associated with creativity, whereas adults at the stability age, their theta waves are more in connection with sleep or hypnagogic conditions. Leibniz, the German polymath, carried out research into the mind, the cognitive ability of the mind, a number of centuries ago, and he actually spoke about the iceberg model. So, for example, at the tip of the iceberg, we've got the conscious, the logic, the deductive. These are maybe the areas that we refer to as being the stable aspects of the human mind, the age of 20 or thereabouts. Whereas the subconscious, the intuitive, and the creative, which is the larger area according to this iceberg model, we could argue that if you turn that literally on its head, a child would be the opposite. So they would be able to look at subconscious aspects from a conscious point. They would actually need to look at intuitive opposed to the logic, and they'd be more creative than deductive. Are we doing enough in that sense at STEM, for example, at nursery schools? Is this an opportunity that we can use to maybe influence the cognitive abilities to really begin to see how the younger mindset approaches certain things that we can do in terms of creativity and design. In terms of creativity, these are comments or points that I've recorded over the years through conversations, discussions, etc. with students, colleagues, research, and various other people that maybe I've got involvement with from industry. I'm not saying that these are relevant, far from it. I still believe they're very appropriate. However, in some cases, I think we need to start really looking at them and potentially challenging them. So, for example, what about the new tools? And we've already had an opportunity here through recent events in terms of COVID, where we're looking at different ways and means of communicating. We've seen exponential growth in Teams, Zoom, you name it. I'm sure we've all got a variety of good and bad experiences of these. And again, in terms of the aspect of our team members, we can't expect people to be on form from the outset of projects. Do we need to reconsider how we manage and how we actually prepare and how we launch projects? And again, looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning, for a number of years we've seen a lot of, let's say, bad press and sci-fi, etc., where this has been looked upon as being negative. I'd rather approach this from a positive and optimistic point. Hopefully, we'll see these areas continue to develop and have a very positive impact on the creative mindset and abilities associated with it. So let's have a look at some work that's been carried out by researchers at the University of Strathclyde. Imagine D, a vision for cognitive-driven creative design, is quite a fascinating area. So for example, you have a user here who's interacting with what appears to be screen-based information using a variety of gestures, emotional response, perceptual feedback, etc. Now that screen base may change. It could be AR, it could be augmented reality, virtual reality, you name it. All of the above, no doubt, will come into play at some point. And in some cases, we're already seeing that in terms of the tools that we have access to. Moving back to the theme of creativity, again, some of these comments or some of these points, if we look at them or begin to challenge them, what can it lend us or what can it lead us to? So I would say that we don't always have to prepare or produce or offer our students projects which start with a problem. Sometimes just keeping things open-ended can create some really interesting insights and opportunities. We can't lose sight of that. How do we link with other members of the team? And what are the best routes for that creative journey and process to be shared? And we've all had experiences that I mentioned earlier about remote working, etc., remote creativity, remote practice. And creativity for a number of years has been looked upon as being a human ability. And maybe it's time to really think closely about the fact that creativity is not just human. I'm sure a number of us will be fascinated by what happens in the natural world. And if you look at certain things that are happening in software, how they're taking influence from that in terms of biodesign, it's really quite phenomenal what's happening. And on that note, I'd like to talk about some work that we're currently doing with Autodesk. So Autodesk, as you're well aware, or may actually use some of their tools, have been developing a range of software titles over the years. And if you look at the conventional process of how products are brought to market, I'm sure a number of us would recognise this series of events that leads to the traditional product lifecycle. Whereas Autodesk are beginning to democratise software and looking at more opportunities that comes through the collaborative aspects of it. One of the quite incredible aspects of this is the fact that a lot of these software tools and products don't have to be run on incredibly expensive computers. I think the days are gone where we have to invest heavily in very advanced workstations. I've got examples of students using some very advanced software tools on smartphones. I wouldn't personally recommend that, but it can be done. So now we're seeing that software is becoming incredibly accessible. And even if you look at things that they're doing in terms of Tinkercad, etc., or even Instructables, that could be aimed at a younger user as well. There's great opportunities that we can harness from that. Some of my own research with colleagues at the University of Glasgow and PhD students is looking at the rehabilitation using brain-computer interface for victims of spinal cord injury or stroke. So this somewhat macabre image is an image which is based on conditions of constraints of a very complex geometry, namely the human head. We are using the generative aspects of Fusion 360 to create different geometries. Now, the software is actually encouraging us to be incredibly creative in how we approach it from a digital manufacturing point. So, for example, we're questioning things. So, do we have a one-size-fits-all, or do we have a customized approach? What is an optimal headset fit? How do we record the best signal? How do we remove noise from the geometry of the device that we're developing? Can we look at the optimization of strength versus weight? Can we consider materials? Again, looking at the optimization of comfort for the user. These are providing us with a number of very interesting developments. In some cases, the time taken to get to a rapid prototype physically made object that we can put in the hands of the user is literally days. Whereas if we were looking at traditional means of manufacturing, it would take months. So the digital manufacturing tools that we now have access to enable us to be very creative with our time. We can carry out a range of different explorations to see the geometry, etc. We can even analyze these, obviously using the software that then obviously influences digital manufacturing. Again, the tools that we're now able to essentially play with in some cases are really opening up a very interesting range of dialogue between the research partners that we're involved in. Moving back to some other areas about creativity, a lot of people actually have referred to the book by Guy Claxton over the years with his Learning the Art of Loafing. And he basically says this is essential for the creativity, productivity, and peace of mind. Now, a number of us will be fully aware that in recent months we've probably never been busier than what we've been in the past. And maybe the ability or the opportunity to learn to loaf has been somewhat vacant in recent months. But if you do have the time, I would recommend that you pick up this book. There's maybe some anecdotes or insights out that you could potentially benefit from. So next steps, maybe these are aspects that we could raise through the conversation discussion that follows from this. I think most of us would agree that scientific understanding is far from complete, whether it's from the early learner up to higher education and beyond. However, I would say that education really needs to begin to harness the creative power of children's minds from the earliest age. So what can we be doing in terms of connecting everything to influence that from a STEM perspective? It would be fair to say that creative practice is working successfully, but again, it needs support. The creative practice and creative industries sector in the UK is a major employer, but again, they are also looking for new talent, etc., to add to their current work and staff teams. So what can we be doing to influence that from maybe the digital manufacturing perspective? Do we need to think about the creative mindset and creative vocabulary? Do we need to think about glossary or nomenclature so when we're discussing aspects of it, we are essentially speaking from the same page? And finally, do we need to think about the organisation of work? Now, I'm not suggesting that we all have a 4-hour week. However, I'm sure a number of us would welcome that. But maybe we need to learn to loaf. Maybe we need to be able to switch off and actually enable ourselves for our brains to engage with other aspects, not just about our professional careers, but obviously that of other elements of our lives, etc. And on that point, I'd like to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Craig Whittet for that presentation. That was really, really great and sets the tone brilliantly for our discussion. So we have about 30 minutes now to discuss in your tables the following 3 questions, which are, what is the current status of creativity and design within digital manufacturing? What is the knowledge gap in creativity and design related to digital manufacturing? And in your groups to decide what are the 2 most pressing research questions regarding creativity and design within digital manufacturing. Don't worry, you don't have to remember all those questions. They will be on the whiteboard once you get into your tables. So don't worry about furiously writing them down now. We have got we have got those written on the whiteboards for you. However, this session is so important to us at Connected Everything because we're going to be using the output from this session to really help shape how Connected Everything will, the focus of our work over the next 2 years. So we would be really grateful if someone on your table could be the nominated note taker. So we do get some feedback from this session, and everything that you put on the whiteboards we'll be downloading after the conference to make sure that we get a record of that and we're able to build that into our work as we're going forward over the next few months. And this will really help influence what Connected Everything is doing in the future. So what we're going to do is break into those tables. Sally and Joe, who are part of the events team, will be jumping around the table. So if you've got any problems with using the whiteboard or anything like that, then Sally and Joe will be able to help and make sure that you can access that. So in order to discuss on your tables, if you haven't already experimented with this, you need to have your camera on and your microphone on in your tables. If you happen to be sitting on your own, if you can just click on another blue seat, then you'll jump into that table. So don't feel at all that you need to be discussing on your own for the next 30 minutes. Please go and join another group because it would be great to have, some tables of, 3 to 6 people on them so we can have some good conversations. So without any further ado, you've got about 30 minutes to discuss those questions, and we'll come back at the end to have a bit of a conversation about the findings. So look forward to seeing you in about 30 minutes time. Thank you. Hi everyone, thank you very much. The table that I was on was certainly a very lively conversation, and I'm really sorry that that just as the passion for the topic was really coming out, then we ran out of time. So apologies for that. However, it would be great if I could just ask a couple of representatives from each of the tables just to come forward and just summarise perhaps a couple of points from their table discussion. So Susan, if I could ask you to accept the invite from Sally, and then you'll be able to come forward and maybe just summarise a few key points from your table, and perhaps that research challenge point that we left the table on, can perhaps be shared as well. Jeremy's asking if we can get the whiteboard back so we can see what we talked about.
Hello there.
Brilliant. Thank you. Susan.
Okay. Hello there. So I suppose, things were getting quite dynamic and interesting towards the end of our conversation because we were talking about responsibility and the impact of digital tools and production and actually making stuff. And I think that for me, and I think a lot of people on the table, the COVID situation has thrown up this idea of reshoring in manufacture. And within Industry 4.0 and circular economies, there's an idea about reshoring. And so we need to be looking at shorter supply chains, micro manufacturing, place-based manufacturing, potentially, and also allowing ourselves to look at the systems and the digital systems and the digital tools that are available to us. And then we had a long conversation about hacking these systems. So they're quite monolithic in that they don't necessarily invite you to hack them. And yet the creativity potentially comes from the hacking of existing systems. So quite often they've been designed without designers in mind, or they hold you very firmly as a designer. And actually the creativity can come when you don't use the tools in the way that they were intended. And this seemed to be a really strong idea among everybody on the table. And, we talked about, how you potentially might teach students to hack the systems, actually, which I think is really interesting from an art school perspective. Enabling students to understand how to hack these systems and then to use them, and us teaching that is a really interesting idea. systems developers are quite often a bit too protective. Just going back to the very beginning, we talked about, obviously primary school age children being digital natives and their ability to pick up on these tools and systems very easily. But I also would like to make a case for kind of current students and how they learn and how they, increase their digital understanding. And I think that that's through engaging with industry very much. And we talked about community, in fact, so online communities, online forums, and networks to support you in your learning of what skill sets you need. We also talked about analog and digital tools and the kind of marriage of the two. So we're not getting rid of analog tools completely. So old skills are still valuable, but it's the marriage of old skills and old tools and new tools that seem to support creativity. I think that's everything.
That's a really impressive summary. Well done. You've got a cracking memory. I was saying one of the.
I was making notes.
Oh wow! Yeah, that's great. And I mean, just to iterate, I did spend some time on your table, and that whole passion for kind of like responsible manufacture, and thinking about the circular economy and things like that. I just felt that I really love the passion that brought about on the table. So that was a great conversation to have. Thank you so much for that summary, Susan. That was great. Jeremy, sorry that the whiteboard is no longer available, but I'm hoping you might have had a couple of minutes to just recap on some of the key points from your table.
Yeah, I bet they don't. They may have notes on paper, but I bet they don't have so many notes on their whiteboard then, because you can't type notes in two places. Next time I'll take a screen copy. So we started thinking about some fundamental things about where the creativity, what it was, how that comes often by when different disciplines interact, you get the most creativity, but that requires addressing the issues of communication, and it requires engagement from both sides. And that type of engagement and communication is not effortless in any way. And so thinking of tools, as mentioned before, tools that enable that communication and ease the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary communication are some of the things that, for example, Google has surpassed itself in that. You can, on Wikipedia, get a quick explanation for something, but it's barely scratches the surface of many of the interactions that are needed. We did then talk about the issue that often things need to be reimagined rather quickly, so you get quite stuck with recycling things that worked before because they did work before, and modifying them a little bit because, well, obviously that's the most efficient thing to do, but it may not get you out of the real traps that you were in. And especially as we start to try and engage across the board. So the product has to be economic to manufacture, have a small environmental footprint, be sustainable, not cause environmental or human damage, and above all, at the end, as I'll come back to again, has to look nice and feel nice and be wanted. So we did see, with the current situation with many people working remotely, sending in automated systems and so on, or the need for that become clearer, the question of whether the robotic systems can become creative and whether the artificial intelligence can rise to that point. We debated whether that would be possible and whether it might just get to the point that it helps you get a solution, but it doesn't help you get the nice solution. But that remains to be seen. But one of the things that certainly ties into are the sets of tools like 3D printers and so on that have enormously reduced the barrier to trying things. You can try it quickly and you can try it relatively cheaply before it gets made into something and you discover you need to take something else and so on. So try something and see if it works is always, I think, been my understanding of where design really trumps, and getting people to do that. Certainly, I'm not sure, when my background as a chemist, we want people to try too many things and see if they work, but think about lots of different things and think if they would work might be better. The issue of coming back to digital, that yes, we can do a lot more calculations now and therefore decide whether things might be worth making. But in most disciplines, that computational power is still nowhere near high enough to do it all. And there are far too many possibilities out there. And anyway, who thought of the possibility? Once you thought of the possibility, you can do the calculation, and that brings in all the digital manufacturing ideas, but you still have to think of it. So systems that help you think about the new things and help you manage that will be useful. And that takes it out then into lots of systems. And then I suppose I could round that off by saying that when working with the digital economy over the last many years, one of the themes that we felt was missing in a lot of individual disciplines was that concept of design. And how can we encourage design ideas and those people who are educated in design in that overarching concept? How can they help the rest of us learn how to do some of that without us necessarily having to go and spend another 3 years back doing a degree, which might have been a good idea in the first place. So I don't know if that's given you some of the gaps on what we might do. The other problem, I guess, that was alluded to is that a lot of the tools, they have enabled enormous building of new systems, but can, as previous speaker said, lock you into things, but have really made systems level integration a real possibility. So there are fantastic things there. But one of the problems can be also that you can't really do that in a digital sense unless the whole system is digitized. And so you can get to the problem that your inputs and outputs are not digital. And so you can spend a lot of time digitizing something, and then what should have been faster ends up being slower. And then you get turned off the whole idea and go back to picking up something that worked before.
Sounds like you're talking from experience there, Jeremy.
Could be. But I want to become a designer. That'll be my new career.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. It sounds like you had a good, robust conversation on your table too. Yep. So just to finish this session, we've got so thank you very much for that, Jeremy, and we've got Craig Whittet just to come in, just to maybe give a final couple of points on kind of how his presentation delivered at the top of the session has led to the discussions and the feedback that you just heard. So Craig, any final kind of thoughts and comments?
Yeah, thanks. It's been really quite fascinating for me just listening and sitting from a kind of a hawk-eye view, looking and listening, which is always great. And I suppose I'm used to kind of working with a bunch of design engineering students, early days, from open days and presentations and showing them what we do and how we do it. And listen to what Jeremy was saying there, for example, in terms of chemistry, and the application of design and thinking into so many different areas of society, industry, etc. I would welcome that and be very positive about that, because I do feel that the thinking processes that we have can be learned. I do feel that some people are maybe more creative than others, but I think there are certain things you can do to level out the playing field in some ways. Okay, there's always going to be people that are incredibly capable and talented. You find that in music, sport, you name it. They're always operating at higher levels. But certainly there are tools there which I think are very accessible. Sorry, my dog has just come in to say hello. It's my cue to learn to loaf and take her out for a walk, possibly. But yeah, I think to summarise, the key thing that I take from it, and I think from what being said in the summaries from both tables, what I read into this is really communication. Communication is key in terms of how we get our message across or how we understand and interpret it, what other people are presenting and discussing. Jeremy was talking about Google and the work that they've done. I was watching something on the news today where face masks obviously causing problems for people with hearing impairment, and how Google Translate or Google Transcribe is now being used by paramedics. These tools are so accessible. Okay, I'm saying they're accessible. Not everybody on the planet does have access to them. I think we have to be appreciative of that, obviously. But there's so many things now that we can touch into and tap into. And we are really, I think, at educational level, we're just beginning to scratch the surface here. As we find out more in terms of what's happening due to COVID, etc., no doubt there'll be even more tools. I was looking at something the other day where it's an app that if you're on Zoom, you can use your mobile phone as a separate camera to then show the work that you're creating. So I had some MSc students who were showing me some prototypes made in cardboard that they were beaming to me real time from their phones as we're having a Zoom conversation. Great. And I'm like, how did you guys do that? Oh, it's an app. So again, just being willing to take on board all this stuff. But at times, the biggest challenge I find is the point where you need to just sit back, absorb it all, and try and work out what are the correct tools that we use, and the ones that I keep trying to buy into more in terms of time are those ones that really facilitate the communication. So that's something I've certainly I've taken from the short session we've had today, is how we communicate and get the message across.
That's really helpful. Thank you a lot, Craig. That's good. And I did like, I think it was one of the final comments that we had was from the group was like, let's not remember to chuck out the baby with the bathwater. You know, there's a lot of good stuff that we do know. You know, let's build on that. Let's not forget it all. Definitely. So thank you very much. And thank you again very much, Craig, for your presentation. That was a great way to kick off the session today. So now we do have a little bit of a break before we go into our final session of day one of the conference. So we have it, if you can sign in at 4 o'clock, if you're able to, we have two sessions, either regulation or resilience, for you to choose from for the final session of the day. And so I look forward to maybe seeing a few of you at the regulation session, or you might be with resilience with Nick Watson. But anyway, we'll see you later, and enjoy a cup of tea now. Thank you.